Is the European Union really undemocratic, too slow, or overburdened by bureaucracy? These are some of the most common criticisms lobbed at the EU, and there's a grain of truth in them. Imagine this: a small country, maybe home to just 9.6 million people, has the power to throw a giant wrench in the works for the entire continent of almost 450 million people. That's right, just one tiny member state can say no thanks and veto decisions, effectively hitting pause on progress for everyone else. Sounds a bit off, right? Or picture waking up one day to the news that someone you've never heard of is the new president of the European Union. Surprised? Well, so were many Europeans in 2019, because the decision to elect von der Leyen came out of nowhere. The process of selecting the EU president often happens behind closed doors, shrouded in secrecy. Sounds like a democratic gap, right? But what if things could change? The upcoming election on June the 9th could be a huge turning point, depending how you vote. Changing the EU fundamentally means altering its treaties, essentially the constitution of the EU. A proposal to amend the treaties is currently making its way through the EU, aiming for some radical changes, such as removing the veto vote and changing the way we elect our president. But as is normal in politics, there are parties in favor and against. The EU houses 7 major political groups, each composed of national parties from across the entire EU, and each has distinct views on these reforms. Some advocate vigorously for change, while others remain staunchly opposed. Let's visually map these groups on a spectrum, from champions of EU reform to those firmly against it, and see where each group stands. First up, meet Renew Europe. They're the liberal cheerleaders of the EU. They dream big about revamping the EU. No more vetoes on foreign policy and taxes, a stronger parliament, and even having a single EU president directly elected by the people, like you and me. Plus, they want EU citizens to vote directly for EU political parties, so we'll have to place them way over on the right of our reform spectrum. Now onto the ECR group, the soft Eurosceptics of the bunch, made up of right-wing conservative parties across the EU. These guys are not fans of change. They see EU treaty changes as the big EU trying to boss around member states. They're all about keeping the veto, keeping the EU Parliament from getting too powerful, and definitely no EU-wide government or election. Their philosophy? Do less, but better. Therefore, we will place them at the very left of our spectrum. Next up, let's chat about the EPP, the center-right heavyweights and the largest group in the parliament. They can be a bit wishy-washy with their plans. Sure, they flirted with the idea of treaty change before, but you won't find it spelled out in their latest manifesto. Ursula von der Leyen, one of the EPP stars, plays it cool by saying she's open to treaty change if and where it's needed. They say they want a more democratic EU and are all for scrapping the veto vote on sanctions. But ask them for specifics on foreign policy or how to pick the Commission president? Crickets. So we're placing them smack in the middle of our spectrum. Moving on to the left group in the European Parliament, made up of the furthest left parties across Europe. They support EU reform and want to embed anti-fascist values right into those treaties. Talk about setting the tone. But that's not all. They want a stronger parliament that can draft laws, select the Commission, and even manage the budget. Yet they're not ready to say adios to the veto just yet. Therefore, we will place them slightly more to the right than the EPP on our reform spectrum, as their plans are simply more concrete. Shifting our focus to the S&D group, another powerhouse in the European Parliament, composed of center-left parties. They are staunch advocates for treaty change to strengthen the European Union. Their vision? To empower both the EU Parliament and the Commission and remove the veto on tax matters, pushing for more uniform fiscal policies across member states. They have also indicated removing the veto vote for foreign policy. Given their stronger stance on vetoes, we'll position them on the right of the left group on our reform spectrum. Moving on to the IND group, composed of the furthest right parties across Europe. This one will be quick. They're staunchly against treaty change, fearing it paves the way to an EU superstate. Their preference? Less power to the Commission and more power to the member states. And of course, they insist on retaining the veto power to safeguard national sovereignty. Therefore, we will put them on the very left on our scale, next to the ECR, who has similar opinions. And lastly, we have the Greens and European Free Alliance in the European Parliament. For the many Volt viewers that watch this channel, Volt currently also sits with the Greens in the European Parliament. and therefore it should come as no surprise that they're all about moving forward with a more integrated and federal Europe, and therefore strongly support treaty change. They want a stronger EU Parliament that can propose legislation, elect the Commission President, and monitor EU spending. They are keen to see the EU take on more responsibilities in health, tax, and social protection. They also advocate for the removal of veto rights in areas like tax, foreign policy, and the use of Article 7, which deals with breaches of core EU values. This firmly faces the Greens on the very right of our spectrum, next to the Liberals. Now here you have the view of our spectrum based on their manifestos. But what about their voting records? In November last year, a reform proposal went through the EU Parliament, and here's how the political groups voted. Green is for, red is against, and white is abstained. So the most pro-treaty reform groups were the Greens/EFA, followed by the S&D, and then Renew Europe. On the other hand, the ECR and the IND were the most against. This also brings an important update. Although the left was initially positioned favorably towards treaty change, their actual voting record shows they're kind of against it. So we will switch them with the EPP, who are clearly more in favor. And now let's add our last variable. Which parties support EU enlargement? Well, with the exception of the Identity and Democracy group, all parties back the idea of enlargement, agreeing that it's long overdue. However, there are some caveats. Each party emphasizes that candidate countries should meet the necessary criteria to join. But the left specifically adds that human rights must also be upheld. Furthermore, the S&D, Greens and Liberals stress that enlargement is only feasible alongside significant reforms. So when it comes to championing EU reform and enlarging, the most proactive parties are the Greens, the Liberals, with the S&D not far behind. Casting your vote for any of these groups would be a strong endorsement for EU reform. However, the differences between them lie more in other policy areas. For instance, the Greens are the strongest on environmental issues, the S&D excel in advocating for social issues, and the Liberals focus on a robust defense. On the opposite end of the spectrum, if you're completely against EU reform, the ECR and IND might align more with your views. This is what we think. We've been very clear about our stance from the beginning. Removing the veto vote is a critical challenge the EU needs to address swiftly. The EU's indecisiveness, often caused by individual small member states, hinders our collective ability to move forward, especially in foreign policy and defense. Our motto is this: if we, whether German, Dutch, or Italian, don't cede a little sovereignty to the EU voluntarily, over which we have control through our vote, we risk losing a whole lot more to foreign actors like Russia, China, and the USA involuntarily, over whom we have no control. Today's video is sponsored by the European Federalists, who advocate taking the concept of EU integration a step further by evolving into a European federation. There are MEPs across the European Parliament that support this group, and we encourage you to explore their views for some compelling insights to the EU's future. You can find more information about them in the video description. To clarify though, we are not affiliated with the Union of the European Federalists, nor are our opinions influenced by them. Both EU Made Simple and UEF are committed to presenting party manifestos transparently. This way you can make an informed decision about who to vote for based on your own judgment. We are super excited to bring you a series of 7 videos, each dedicated to a different political group in the European Parliament. These videos are designed to equip you with the knowledge you need to vote confidently. For instance, you can start by exploring the EPP here, or delve into Renew Europe here. Please subscribe to our channel now to stay updated as we release more EU election content. And if you're passionate about helping us spread knowledge on the EU, please think about joining our Patreon community. Until next time.